Hello, I'm now reconvening the special council meeting of March 8th, which we put into recess till now, so that everybody had time to read and consider the vast amount of information in front of council. Madam Clerk, we have no regrets. Council, do we have any declarations of pecuniary interest? Madam Clerk, I see none. Our first and only business tonight is the discussion item, the housing situation in Ontario and the Oakville's housing pledge and how it all relates. This evening we have a long and detailed presentation from staff. It's going to be led off by the CAO, who will introduce the parts. She has requested that we make notes and hold our questions until she gets to the end and asks for questions, and I think we can do that for her. Madam CAO, Jane Closey, welcome to the meeting. It's regrettable that because of the times we live in, you have to be remote, but anyway, here you are. And we are now ready to hear from you and your team.
Thank you, Mayor Burton. I trust you can hear me fine. Okay. You had 3 reports on your agenda tonight, and I would like to ask your indulgence, as the mayor had said, to hold your questions to the end of the presentations. I think actually it will be a benefit for you to have heard all the information. It's probably the best use of your time. Excuse me. Given each of the reports build off each other, it's important to hear all 3 of them. I would like to first introduce Dr. Mike Moffat. He will share some of the broader economic context to understand the challenges that we're facing in Ontario and with this housing market. Following Dr. Moffat, I have some brief remarks for you, and then followed by a presentation from Gabe Charles, your Director of Planning. Dr. Moffat is a Senior Director of Policy and Innovation at the Smart Prosperity Institute and an Associate Professor of the Business Economics and Public Policy Group at Ivey Business School, Western University. His research at the Smart Prosperity Institute focuses on the intersection of regional economic development, building child-friendly, climate-friendly housing and communities, and the clean innovation. Dr. Moffat has worked with politicians and policymakers of all stripes, of all political stripes, and in several countries to craft more effective public policy. He and the Smart Prosperity Institute have been active in the 1.5 million HUN's target growth and population migration and policy tools and trends. Dr. Moffat holds a PhD in management science from Ivy League or Ivy Business School, and an MA or a master's in economics from the University of Rochester. So Mayor and members of council, I'm very pleased to present to you Dr. Moffat. Dr. Moffat?
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for having me here today. So I could, you've got this all ready for me. Okay, fantastic. So some brief remarks, some high-level overview about the housing situation in Ontario. So next slide, please. So housing, when it comes to demographics and population growth, housing needs are somewhat proportional to the number of adults or the increase in the number of adults into the population. You know, adding a second child to a family doesn't really change the number of housing units that are needed, but a growing number of adults certainly will. And what we've seen since about 2016 is a large increase in Ontario's population of adults. And over the last 12 months or so, we've actually been growing at over double the rate that we've been growing at prior to 2016. So we're adding a whole lot of adults to our population. Next slide, please. So where are they all coming from? Well, it's essentially 2 sources. So it's largely about 2/3 of it is immigration. Now, I should point out that many of the new immigrants to Canada have already been here for some time under student visas or other visas. And we've also added over 100,000 non-permanent residents. So those are things like people on student visas and so on. And these are all net figures, so they take into account sort of coming and going. So that's basically why we've added about 300,000 adults to our population over the last 12 months, is a combination of increased immigration and increased non-permanent residents, mostly international students. The higher education sector had a very good enrollment in September, that they hit or exceeded their enrollment targets. And I should point out that the term non-permanent residents is a bit of a misnomer, because we know about anywhere from about 30 to 40% of all international students will end up staying after graduation under the postgraduate work permit program, and then eventually apply for permanent residency. So many of these non-permanent residents will become permanent at some point. So it's going to be important that we have enough housing for everyone. Next slide, please. So if we move this forward, we know back on November 1st, the federal government increased immigration targets, increasing the targets up to 500,000 people across Canada in 2025. Ontario receives about 46% of all immigrants. So if we take 46% of 500,000, we should expect about 235,000 new Ontarians every year just through immigration. And that doesn't count international students and so on. Next slide, please. Now, on the flip side, one of the things that's causing some almost like a safety valve on our housing needs is people leaving the province for other provinces. So between July 1st of 2021 and June 30th of 2022, Ontario lost on net about 47,000 people to other provinces. And this is highly unusual that historically Ontario has most of the time gained people from other provinces. We're now losing them. And this loss is not due to fewer people moving here from other provinces, but it's actually more Ontarians moving out to other provinces. This has actually escalated since this data came out, and we'll have new population data on Wednesday morning, which I believe is going to show this factor accelerate even more. So we've seen a lot of people moving out. Next slide, please. And the reason that they're moving out is not that hard to figure out. If we look at real estate prices, so here I'm looking at single-family home prices, but I could show rents, I could show any metric we have on home prices. Ontario is really expensive. So the top communities in blue are all ones in Ontario. The ones in green are other cities, and they're not other Canadian cities outside of Ontario. And they're not all small places. Like it's places like Montreal, Calgary, and Edmonton, and so on. So one example I like to use is that every city in Southern Ontario that has an OHL team has more expensive housing and more expensive rents than Edmonton. So if you're playing for the Windsor Spitfires or the Peterborough Petes or the Sarnia Sting, and you get called up to play for Edmonton, your rent's going down. That's how expensive things have gotten in Southern Ontario. And that's not supposed to happen, right? Big cities are supposed to be more expensive than smaller communities. There's something I think inherently wrong when Edmonton is more expensive, or Sarnia is more expensive than Edmonton, and Tillsonburg is more expensive than Montreal. Something has been fundamentally broken in our housing system. So next slide, please. And where are they all going? Well, it turns out the most popular destination in recent years has been Alberta, which isn't surprising given the last data I showed, showing that real estate prices are relatively inexpensive in Edmonton and Calgary. Atlantic Canada is also quite popular in recent years. We have some more information about who's leaving. Over half of them are between the ages of 25 and 35. So these are people starting their careers. And they're moving mostly for housing related costs, but for other reasons as well. So for healthcare workers, trades workers, and so on, Alberta pays a little bit better than Ontario. So, if you are an early childhood educator, and you're living, let's say you're living somewhere in the GTA, you could move to Edmonton, make an extra $8,000 to $10,000 a year on your salary, and have your rent go down by about $1,200 that a month. That is a really attractive proposition for young people, and it's causing this out migration. Next slide, please. So what we know is based on these population based on the current state of public policy, if nothing changes, then 1.5 million net new homes is probably a reasonable estimate. Now, things could change. Immigration targets could go up or go down depending on the mood of the federal government and which party is in the federal government. We could, colleges and universities could change their enrollment targets. We could change rules around that. So there's a lot of public policy that could change the rate of population growth. But if we have the same sort of policy environment, 1.5 million net new homes is a reasonable estimate. And in fact, if the federal government keeps increasing immigration targets like they did back in November, it may in fact be an underestimate of what we need. But again, we do have this kind of safety valve that, on population growth, that young Ontarians are leaving, which I don't think is a fantastic thing. We're seeing a skills and brain drain from Ontario, again, to places like Alberta. Next slide, please. So the provincial government has this 1.5 million targets, which is very blunt. And I think I think at a high level it makes sense, but I think we need to go a little bit more granular on this. So we know that a unit is not a unit, right? We can't necessarily treat a 3-bedroom apartment the same way that we treat a studio suite. We can't treat an affordable unit the same way as we do as a market rent. There are different market segments and different market needs. So, we need to go a lot further on this. We need to start thinking about breakdowns of sizes, types, prices, and so on. So I think that's kind of the first thing we need to think about. But the second thing we need to think about is, how are we actually going to do this? How are we actually going to build 1.5 million homes, either net or gross, in the next 10 years? And to put this into context, next slide, please. If we look at the history of housing completions, this shows how many houses are completed in any 10-year period going back from 1955 to 1964. We actually have additional data that goes back to the start of World War II, or sorry, the end of World War II. Just didn't break down by singles and apartments. But what we know is that we have never in this province ever built more than 850,000 homes in the last 10 years. We haven't built 750,000, or even half of that target, in any 10-year period since the end of 1972 to the end of 1982. So I saw recently on Twitter, somebody pointed out that it was the 40th anniversary of the final episode of MASH. That period where we built those 750,000 homes in 10 years, that was basically when we were making new episodes of MASH. That is the last time in this province we have made 750,000 homes. So now what we have to do, to keep up with population growth, is we need to do something that we haven't done in 40 to 50 years since MASH was a new show, and then somehow double it. Next slide, please. So this kind of just summarizes what I said before. We need to just double it. And I think even that probably understates the challenge, because over the last 15 years or so, the homes that we have built have largely been a lot of one bedroom and studio suites, studio apartments. And we know that the largest, the most pressing need is actually for family sized homes. So not only are we not building enough homes, but the homes that we're building are disproportionately not child friendly. And we know that that's where the demand is. And that's the population that we're losing is a lot of 25 to 35-year-olds who really would like to start a family and have kids. And we're not building those types of units anymore. Next slide, please. So, and not only is this going to be a challenge to increase our housing supply, but the provincial government itself says because of economic conditions that housing starts are actually going to fall over the short term. So we had some forecasts in budgets, the provincial budget 2022, which saw housing starts fall in 2023 and then rebound back up, but they certainly weren't going anywhere near 150,000 a year. In the fall economic statement, those were revised downward even further. And I anticipate in Thursday's budget that these are going to be revised downward even further, just based on the projections we're seeing from the big six banks and along with the current economic conditions. So we need to double our home building at a time when all of our economic conditions are pushing us in the other direction to scale back our home building. Next slide, please. And finally, that the province has a blueprint for achieving this target. It's their housing task force reports that came out about February of last year. It's certainly not a perfect document, but it does provide a blueprint of how the province thinks it can get to 1.5 million. But we should note that the blueprint has 55 recommendations, and we can kind of split them into a third, a third, a third. That basically a third of the recommendations the government is acting on, the provincial government is acting on. A third, they're starting to move in that direction. They've gotten sort of part way, but not full way there. And then 18 of 55, the final third, they haven't really moved on at all. So we have this document, this blueprint, we have this real pressing need for 150,000 homes, but a large portion, depending on how you want to define it, of the recommendations in the task force report haven't really been acted on yet. And then finally, the provincial government's also doing things that are outside of the scope of the task force report, like taking land out of the green belts, which the task force report was explicit that isn't needed to hit our target. So we're in a bit of a strange policy environment where the government's taking some of the task force recommendations, not acting on some, and then going against others. So it's a bit of a bumpy policy environment. Next slide, please. So at SBI, we're doing some work with the Ontario Big City Mayors to look at how we could actually do this. What needs to happen? What do the various actors in the system need to do? So all three levels of government, the higher education sector, builders, developers, labor, and so on. And to figure out what they need to do, I think we need to figure out what the biggest challenges are to building 1.5 million homes. And it's not as much as we hear issues around approvals and zoning and things like that. We could wave a magic wand. We could have the most optimal zoning and approvals process, both municipally and provincially in the world. That alone is not going to get us to 1.5. There are bigger barriers that exist. The first one is just labor shortages in the skilled trades. And demographics are making this harder. My dad's a retired sheet metal worker. His cohort's all retiring. It's going to be hard enough to replace that cohort. And now we're losing a bunch of them to Alberta. So there's now ads all over the place. Alberta is calling. And in the ads, the Alberta government on the radio is explicitly asking Ontario skilled trades workers to move to Alberta and build them homes instead of building them here. We have issues about productivity in the building sector. We build homes, houses, apartments the same way that my dad did back in the 60s and 70s, but we don't build anything else that way. We have lagging productivity. We don't have enough non-market housing investment. You know, the governments are moving in that direction, but it's not nearly the scale we need. We're losing a lot of affordable units to gentrification and rent evictions of families moving in and rent evicting the existing tenants to create homes. So what's happening on the ownership, the lack of ownership housing is affecting the lack of rental housing. We have a big mismatch between the type of supply we're bringing on and the need. You know, we're pretty good at building market rate small apartment units. We're pretty good at that, but that's not all what we need. We're not so great at building an affordable, and we're not so great at building, particularly things like larger apartment units that are suitable for kids. Next slide, please. We don't really have a plan to address the issue of what I've called involuntary overhoused. So although we have a housing shortage, a housing crisis, we also have a large population of people. Again, I'm going to pick on my parents here. People like my parents, they're in their mid 70s. They live in London, Ontario. They live in the same large suburban 4-bedroom house that I grew up in. They would love to be able to downsize, sell that property to a next generation of families. But they can't really do that because there's nowhere for them to go. We're not building enough seniors friendly housing. So we have this, weird situation where we don't have enough housing, but we also have a lot of houses with a lot of empty bedrooms. So there's this real sort of mismatch here. I'm going to call out my own sector, the higher education sector. We're bringing in a lot of international students. We're not building a lot of student residences, and that's putting pressure on mid-sized college and university towns across Ontario. So London, Guelph, Kitchener-Waterloo, and so on. They're having some of the fastest rising rents in the country, and that's largely due to an increase in the population of people in their late teens and early 20s. We don't really have a plan to address conversions into short-term rentals. We know that Airbnb and other STRs are eating up some of the rental stock. We don't really have a plan to address market conditions. We can do all the things in the world, but if interest rates make it unprofitable to build or impossible to finance new projects, then they're not going to get built. And then finally, our tax code in many ways advances speculation over building new units. I think this is a problem. I think we need to tweak our tax code somewhat, particularly at the federal level, to incentivize those billions and trillions of dollars floating around international markets. Instead of having that money buy up existing units, have that money, incentivize that money to get shovels in the ground and build some more units. So have the need for investment, have the need for returns work to create affordability rather than detract from it. Next slide, please. So we need a detailed plan. There's a lot of finger pointing going on. There's a lot of, one level of government blaming another level of government, and so on. We need to work together. We need the federal government, provincial government, municipalities, groups like the FCM, the OBCM, and so on. We need to work with builders and developers so they get units built. We need to work with the higher education sector, partly because we're causing some of the housing demand, and partly because hopefully we can train, the skilled trades, the planners, and so on to address many of these skill shortages we're having in the province. So next slide. We need some yearly targets. It's one thing to say, okay, we need 1.5 million now, but we're not going to build all those in year 10. We need to know what that escalation looks like. Need some data, some agreed upon definitions. We need to have an idea of how many homes are, how many units have been approved but not built. We need that. We need that data. We need to, because that first of all helps analysts like me know what's going on, but also helps us keep each other accountable. We have to understand that housing is a system. We have to understand that we have environmental and climate goals. And finally, we need to co-develop these plans with stakeholders. And I think that's it. Next slide, please. And that's it for me. Happy to answer questions when the time comes. Thank you.
So Mayor and members of council, Mike will be staying with us until we get to the question period a little bit later. The reports on the agenda tonight have been prepared with input from all the commissions, given the far-reaching implications of and impact on town services resulting from the provincial request to accelerate really the pace of growth. Gabe Charles, as I had said, our Director of Planning, will present the pledge, what it means to Oakville's housing supply, our role in the delivery of housing, and why we're recommending that we should be signing on to the pledge. Also on the agenda tonight, you have an information report on our master plans, which are currently underway. We have the Parks Rec Library master plan, the fire master plan, and of course the transportation master plan. The master plans and the associated financial analysis that we will be doing as part of that will provide us a high-level assessment of the impact of both the accelerated timeframe for the growth, as well as what are the financial gaps as a result of the changes in development charges from Bill 23. So that work will all be done as part of the master plan process. So as partners, and we are a partner in the delivery of homes for our existing and our future residents, we feel that we are ready to meet the challenge of, or the pledge that the province has requested us to sign on to. Meeting the pledge, as Mike has, I think, clearly set out, will require a considerable effort from all the stakeholders. We're not alone in this. We will rely on the region and the province to deliver on the infrastructure to support the growth, whether it's the water and wastewater pipes that the region provides to us, or things like the Kerr Street underpass and the midtime improvements. Those are all going to be delivered by our other partners at the region and the province. We also, as Mike has said, need that favorable economic climate. We're supportive of interest rates, the availability of skilled labor, the steady supply of building materials, just to name a few. And we will need willing partners in the development industry to make applications and actually build the units themselves. We, as I've already said, are ready to do our part in meeting the requirements of the pledge. The more detailed pledge that was distributed by Mayor Burton last week and included as part of your agenda does identify the steps that we're taking in order to be able to achieve the pledge, or at least to do our part in moving towards achieving that pledge. As we move forward, we will continue to monitor the supply of housing. I think Mike's point about the metrics and measuring all of those things are key and important to us being able to see how we're progressing towards that pledge. We are confident that we're going to be able to demonstrate that we're doing our part in meeting that pledge. What the monitoring also does is allow us to monitor that pace of growth and the supply of housing so that it can then inform our capital plans or forecasts of our capital plan, as well as our annual capital budget, so we can be providing those services as needed within the community. So I'd like now to turn to Gabe Charles, who will present the housing pledge, and then I'll just have a few concluding remarks. So Gabe, here's Gabe.
Thank you, Madam CEO, and thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council. This presentation, as Ms. Closey said, will be touching on the housing pledge for Oakville. So as council is aware, when the province released Bill 23 the day after the municipal election, it had included a bulletin which was speaking to the province's intent to deliver 1.5 million homes across the province. As part of that, there were 1.2 million units allocated to 29 municipalities. And Oakville's share of that was 33,000 units. And with that housing target, the province asked municipalities to sign a pledge that would identify how municipalities will achieve that housing target, whether it was through strategies, tools, other sorts of initiatives, and therefore how those municipalities were going to contribute to the overall number that the province had identified. So, and as Dr. Moffat, I think, very clearly mentioned, there's no doubt that there are challenges for housing in Ontario and across the GTA in terms of finding people being able to find housing that fits their lifestyles, their financial situations, etc. There's also a desperate need for supportive housing and assisted housing as well. And although the pledge is not a legal or binding document, it does show how the town will do its part to meet our share of the housing. And the province has also asked that and tabled a regulation recently that will identify how the town is doing against that requirement and how we're tracking annually. So the challenge is before us is really what that partnership looks like. It is a very complex partnership, as has been noted, which requires all levels of government to come to the table, as well as Oakville and the development industry. The growth that we're looking at is the same growth that we would have been seeing no matter what. It just now comes at us in a more compressed time frame. So the number of units or the volume of units, we're going to have that anyway, and that isn't the challenge, is how do we support the volume within that compressed time frame. What this graph illustrates is the number of units to 2031 that Oakville had already been planning for in coordination with Halton Region. As council may remember through the IGMS work and Rope 49, it was roughly 23,000 or so units by 2031. We're now looking at 33,000 units by 2031. So this was a number that we would have otherwise aimed for by 2036. So we're looking at that 5 years sooner. And as I mentioned, the other piece that we need to be cognizant of is with new housing, it's not just the market-based housing, it's also the special needs housing, the supportive housing. So within the full spectrum of housing, how are we delivering all the different pieces, or how are all the different pieces being delivered for the community such that people all have a place to call home? One that's going to meet the different tenure requirements, demographics, etc. So the province's role in this is they set out that overall policy direction. They have the housing component that says this is what we want to achieve across the province. They iterate that through the PPS. They say where we can grow. We see that through the growth plan, the Greenbelt plan, etc. And that then reflects down to the regions and to the local municipalities. But the other piece is how the province will deliver the infrastructure as well. That's going to support that housing, whether that's through environmental assessment approvals, whether that's through working with ministries such as MTO to deliver interchanges on the QEW, whether that's looking at underpasses, for example, curb, Burloak, etc. Those are all pieces that need to be delivered in coordination with the province. And although they've noted that there will be addressing the funding shortfall, there's the other components of the community infrastructure. We know that the ministry provides dollars for delivering schools and hospitals. We need to ensure that that's delivered in a matching time frame with when the housing is coming along. So to note, to meet the pledge, we need adequate and coordinated funding from senior levels of government. It's imperative that that is delivered to ensure that the essential hard and soft infrastructure is there, whether it's healthcare, transit, transportation, social services, education. And the other part I would note too is how they will support on assisted and social housing programs. With Halton Region, they're delivering the big pieces of infrastructure, the main trunks, the bigger regional roads, etc. And that master planning needs to be coordinated with the local municipalities. We identify where we're going to be growing, how we're going to be growing, and therefore, how are we going to ensure that the infrastructure is coordinated with the delivery of that housing. And that means it's not just how do we allocate growth to the greenfield, but how do we ensure that there's sufficient infrastructure for intensification south of Dundas Street, for example. So that is an ongoing work that we need to ensure the region is attuned to. And as noted earlier this evening, things such as Halton Community Housing Corp delivering on supportive housing as well. How do all of these pieces fit together? With the developer's role, they're the ones that are doing the building. They're building the houses, they're putting in the roads, they're putting in the pipes, et cetera. They're the ones who are doing the construction. But they also need to partner in terms of the delivery of rental and supportive housing as well. It's not just sufficient for others to put up the dollars. We need them to come to the table to help deliver that kind of housing as well. The challenges that they're faced with, and I think Dr. Moffat said quite well, relating to construction timeframe, labor shortages from skilled trades, housing of not all the pieces that go with that labor market, supply chain as well. The town's role in all of this is that we enable, we facilitate the housing. We don't deliver the housing, we don't build the housing, but we set the groundwork for where that housing is going to go and how it's going to function. And we do that through our official plan, as council knows. That sets the direction for how and where we're going to grow. It reflects our community context, establishes how we're going to implement provincial and regional direction and policies. Our official plan also has objectives and policies in there for how we need to ensure complete communities, which includes a full spectrum of housing as well. And the other piece to this is that we continue to revisit our development application processes, ensure that those are working for stakeholders, that they're efficient, that they're streamlined, that we're doing that not just through planning, but also through building permits, through development engineering review, et cetera. So what this opportunity is, and as I was noting through the official plan, this council and its predecessors has set the trajectory for how we're going to grow and where we're going to put that growth. How we're going to guide that future growth, the manner in which that development is going to be realized. We are continuing to refine and update our official plan, but the foundational piece of the OP is our urban structure. That's our framework. It directs growth to an identified system of centers and corridors, those strategic growth areas, and that's important because it's easier to plan for the infrastructure when you know where that growth is going to go, where it can be well served by transit as well. That allows us to not just plan, but coordinate that infrastructure as well. So the urban structure also allows us to maintain the character of our residential areas, ensure the preservation and protection of our natural heritage, cultural heritage, and our open space areas. We'll also be working over the next little while on our housing strategy, which will touch on a number of different tools that we'll need for implementation, not just policy, but also things like inclusionary zoning, how we'll deal with rental stock, et cetera. So to give council an idea of the number of units, right now we have just over 1,400, or we have issued just over 1,400 new residential units or permits for new residential units since the housing target was released. We also have within our development application review pipeline over 24,000 residential units. That's scattered across the entirety of the municipality. That's not in one specific area. And the reason that's important is because we're on the way to to meeting the number of units that have already been planned for us. So through our official plan in areas such as whether that's Midtown, whether Palermo, North Oakville, et cetera, we have over 33,000 units already planned, just based purely on our land use policy. So to give you an idea, over the last 7 years or so, we averaged roughly 1,900 building permits per year for new residential units. 2022, 3,000 or just over 3,000 units were built. And I think there was a typo in the staff report. I think I had 3,410 in the staff report. That was a typo. My apologies for that. It was 3,064. As we continue to go through and dive deeper into the data, the numbers continue to be refined. So where we're at now, why should we be looking at executing this pledge? The town recognizes the need for attainable housing. And that's across the entirety of the housing spectrum. We have continued to do our part thus far. We continue to improve on how we are delivering, whether that's through our processes, whether it's through our updates to our official plan. And we know that we can easily meet the pledge based on how we have designed the urban structure and how we are directing growth to that. We have nearly 25,000 residential units in active development applications, which we anticipate realizing within the next 10 years. And this all only works if there is that coordinated effort with the other levels of government and them delivering that infrastructure. We'll continue to do our part by refining our processes, as I've noted, how we're tracking and how we'll be reporting to the province annually on all of those items. And Mr. Mayor, the recommendation of the report is before you now, and certainly if there's any questions, there's a town staff team here to be able to answer those.
Thank you, Mr. Director. Madam CAO, did you have a final word?
I did. So Mayor and members of council, I think Dr. Moffat has clearly demonstrated that housing is a needed piece that we need within the province and of course in Oakville as well. It's required for economic prosperity as well as for healthy communities in front of us. As Gabe or your Director of Planning has pointed out, we have the ability to achieve those number of units with the urban structure that this council has put in place. So that's within our grasp in order to achieve it. And we may even actually achieve it even if we didn't sign on to the pledge. The province has made it actually very clear that if we do not decide to sign on to a pledge, we should not be expecting any infrastructure support from them. So for all of those reasons, staff are recommending that we sign on to the pledge. We have the capability to carry out our part of that pledge and be able to successfully in at least finish our components. So you have a full range of staff and Dr. Moffat to answer any questions you have. Mayor, we're in your hands.
Thank you, Madam CAO. There's no shortage of questions. The lead-off batters are Councillor Duddick, Councillor Giddings, Councillor McNeice, and Councillor Lischina. I'm sure there'll be more. Councillor Duddick.
Thank you, Your Worship. Very, very beneficial hearing from Dr. Moffat as well as our own staff. Totally understand how complex this issue is, hence why I don't think it's been addressed thus far, because everybody sort of avoids dealing with the elephant in the room. I guess I have two questions, and I dare say several of my colleagues will have others. Is the province addressing the already approved applications that are currently in the queue? They're directing towards future development, but are they doing anything to expedite or hold the developers, shall I say, accountable for the ones that have already been approved or are already in the tracking?
Maybe I'll start. The province had, I think the only incentive, I'll phrase it that way, that the province has provided to the developers is the relief that they've given through the development charges and the other mechanisms to incent them in some way to build onto the housing. Other than that, I'm not aware of any further things that the province has done, and I'd look to the rest of the team to see if they would have anything to add to that.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, from our perspective, the province hasn't been doing anything extra or alluded to doing anything extra beyond what Madam Closey has already mentioned. One of the things that we are looking at tracking right now is the gap between when planning approvals are issued and building permits are released. And right now, our latest information was there's less than 1,000 units, around 700 or so units, which remain not spoken for at this point.
Okay, thank you. The other question I have, and I guess the one that really, what shall I say, gives me considerable concern is we're being asked to provide a pledge. Is there a similar pledge other than hearing that the province has indicated they will make us whole? And as I said at the region, whole for them is without a W in my estimation, because we may end up with a hole as a result of not having that funding. So is there any kind of ownership that they provide a pledge in writing to us as well, so that we're actually partners in this?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I haven't heard of anything similar to that. The regulation that was released was specific to municipalities, and if you take a look at the information that the province is looking for, it's primarily focused towards market type housing. It is something that we flagged in our comments to the province that we need to ensure that we're looking at the full spectrum of housing. Therefore, reporting on the number of new rental units, for example, the number of new long-term care units that have been provided. So we think that through the reporting, we'll be able to offer a little bit more. But other than that, haven't heard that the requirement to report extends beyond the municipalities.
Okay, disappointing to say the least, but I appreciate the answers.
Thank you, Councillor Dudek. In one, when you asked if the province about pledges by anybody else, there is a letter from the minister to the Association of Municipalities of Ontario. As you know, the province has a memorandum of understanding with AMO that that's who they talk to when they want to talk to all of us. And you've been provided that letter. It was November 30th. And at the end, in that letter and in the pledge draft that you have, that's quoted, where the minister seems to say that there'll be no making anybody whole who doesn't make a pledge. And at the front of that sentence, he says nobody should lose money over Bill 23 unless they didn't give the pledge, I guess is the language that they're using. So I don't know what comfort you can take from that, but that's the official word from the ministry. Councillor Giddings, you're next.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Charles, you at least 33,260 units. It's encouraging after reading the regional report and your number. Any sense of the timing of any of those, like in terms of by year or by quartile over the 10 years?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the number of units that we have in under active development review right now is over 24,000. So that would be a component of that 33,000 number that has been planned for. Those 24,000 units are ones that we would or could expect within the next 10 years, for example. We have more units than that actually in our full pipeline, but because of the challenges or the timeliness of getting infrastructure to some of those areas, we didn't account for those at this time. But it does line up at around 33,000 or just over 33,000 units as well. So it does fit rather tightly in with the number of planned units that we already have.
Overachieving already. Curious in terms of garden suites or accessory units. We're starting to get calls from people anxious to move forward. Any guesstimate in terms of, are we talking hundreds or perhaps thousands? I know it's a bit of a guess there, but just based on what you may have heard from some of your colleagues.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, not every property, I'll say, would really lend itself to accommodating 3 units. I would suggest that you're probably in the hundreds as opposed to the thousands of potential new units over the next 10 years.
So it won't move the needle at all?
I don't believe it will, but I've been proven wrong before.
Haven't we all? All right, and thank you. CAO Closey, you're there?
Yes, I am.
It was good to see from the regional report as well that the infrastructure in terms of pipes for Midtown should be there for 2026. So that will certainly accommodate building, if it moves forward, to be within that 10-year time frame. What about the infrastructure required to make the area work in terms of the bridges and tunnels and so on? Can you comment on that?
That piece of the infrastructure, the most important part of Midtown is the provincial highway system with getting the Royal Windsor Drive and the other access from the QEW onto Trafalgar Road. Those pieces are delivered by the province. We have been working very closely with them but we have no indication of timing on the transportation side of it as well. So I don't really have an answer for you on that one yet. Then we'd hope that the province would come through with that infrastructure.
All right, thank you. And Dr. Moffat, are you on the screen?
There he is.
Yeah, I'm here.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation. I read with interest the forecast for failure that was done for Build, as well as the 1 million new Ontarians that was done for the big city mayors. You mentioned during your presentation that it depends on when the builders or developers get the shovels in the ground. And you talked about labor and a number of other concerns. Based on the people that you've been talking to, any optimism there? It's getting better, or it's going to be a day-to-day situation?
It's going to be challenging, that's for sure. I'm probably more optimistic than I was a year ago, simply because I feel like we're now all sort of understanding the scope of the problem. And I think the first step into solving any problem is admitting that you have one and admitting where you are one. So I know the provincial government, for instance, is making a number of steps to try to increase the number of tradespeople. I think that's, I think that's helpful. There's changes to the provincial nominee program, and again on immigration to bring in more skilled trades. So I think these things are helpful, but I think there needs to be more done. The parts that I would see that were furthest behind are probably not so much the labor parts, because I think that one is well understood. I think it's more around some of the questions of federal tax and incentives. Again, going back to the federal tax system, that back in the 1960s and 1970s, there were a number of tax incentives in place to build purpose-built rentals that were taken away, I think, in 1973 or 74. I think those are the kinds of things that we need to be looking at. I think the productivity side that we haven't seen much movement on, and other issues as well. I know we've across the country and across the province, we have a few projects using mass timber. There's a couple in the city of Toronto, for instance. These have potential both on environmental grounds, but also speed of build and labor supply. They tend to be less labor intensive to build, and they can be done quicker. But the problem is, one of the issues with it is it's a novel technology, and a lot of insurance companies don't want to touch it. So there were big insurance gaps, and I know those two projects had significant difficulty getting insurance. So I think there's a public policy role for the CMHC and others. So I think there's more work to be done. But again, I am more optimistic than I was say 12 months ago that this is possible.
Optimism is good. You talked about affordability, and you made it very clear in terms of the challenges that we face. During your discussions with Build, anything in terms of what their relations with the province could do in terms of removing provincial sales tax from building materials or items such as that?
Well, absolutely. So that would be one I know that they've been advocating for some time to try and drive the cost down. Obviously, as well, there's delays in provincial approvals. That was mentioned in the other presentation. Those are issues for Build. Even things like looking at import tariffs on construction materials. That is something that the federal government could move on, of being able to bring in bathtubs and other things that we don't manufacture here and can't necessarily manufacture here in Canada at a lower rate. So I do think there is room both at the federal and provincial level to investigate ways to reduce the cost of construction, whether that, particularly on the materials side of things, and that could be HST or other mechanisms.
Thank you. We've heard a lot about affordability from residents and from the press and from the industry. Recently, a lot of homes have been marched down by hundreds of thousands of dollars because interest rates seem to have a bit of an effect on sales. And would now not be a good time for builders to continue building if they're concerned about affordability?
Well, they have challenges as well. I mean, because those higher interest rates are costs for them. But I do think there is need to kind of keep everyone accountable on this. I do think having better data on things like approved but not built, and allowing us to ask those questions of like, hey, you've got a great project here. Why aren't you building it? So I do think it's important that we have transparency, we have accountability, so we can start asking these questions when projects, projects that look really good on paper are not getting approved or are not even being proposed. We can start asking those questions and try and figure out what's going on.
All right, thank you. And we've got a lineup of speakers. I just have one more question for you in terms of, in a number of your papers, you talk about the need for family-friendly, climate-friendly housing. What would you call family-friendly?
So it's a great question. So I tend to think of anything that's essentially 3 bedrooms or larger, and that's certainly not necessarily single detached. In fact, I think one of the biggest shortages we have in this province is mid-rise apartments and larger units of that. But this tends to be once you get beyond the sort of financial side, I think the biggest thing that families are looking for is that third bedroom. But I do think we actually need to have a little bit more market research to actually figure that out, that what are families looking for and what are they not able to get in Ontario that they are able to get in Alberta and Nova Scotia and New Brunswick, the provinces that they're moving to.
So that family-friendly with several bedrooms or 3 bedrooms, even in a condo building, would allow for families, for children, green space, and have a complete community.
Absolutely. If there's a park, there's a school nearby, absolutely.
And last question, climate-friendly housing. Mm-hmm. You've seen some best practices and you've probably seen some that you question.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we think of climate friendly, there's basically 2 important dimensions. One is the nature of the building itself. How energy efficient is it and how carbon efficient is it? So that's things like on the energy efficiency side, that's things like insulation. That's things like how is it heated? Does it use fuel, or is there a heat pump? On the carbon side, again, those go around issues of how is it an electric water heater versus a gas water heater? Does it is there solar water heating, and those types of questions. On the second dimension would be actually where the house is itself. Is it in a walkable community, so I can walk or take transit or take a bike and get my groceries, or do I have to hop into a car? So basically, the nature of the building itself and the location of the building relative to amenities.
Thank you, Doctor. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Giddings. Councillor McNeice?
Thank you. Through you, Your Worship, thank you to Dr. Moffat for the presentation, as well as staff. So I'll start by just picking up on the family-friendly units. So we learned from Dr. Moffat that we're losing many of these sort of demographics, Alberta and other places, because of affordability concerns. So it would lead me to believe that in our highest growth areas, hopefully we'll have some more affordability and they can be more family friendly. But how do we ensure that we have adequate space and I guess resources for schools? Do we have it in our secondary plans that we have the land for it, or are we going to end up with sort of these podium schools that you'll see in sort of downtown Toronto that lack the recreational space? I guess that would be for staff. But.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, so I'll try to unpack a couple of those pieces. Where it comes to ensuring that there is sufficient school space, we obviously need to work with our board partners to identify where is it most appropriate for locating schools, whether it's in our SGAs, whether it's in greenfield situations, et cetera. North of Dundas, we've done that work years ago, and we continue to monitor how growth is coming along through North Oakville. And quite frankly, we've been in situations where the land is ready, the board's ready to go, but they can't get the funding. So these are examples where the province needs to ensure that it is funding the schools when the opportunity arises. Within the SGAs, our strategic growth areas, we continue to look at how do we encourage, incent, persuade developers to be able to provide multi-bedroom units. So whether it's 2 plus 3, how do we encourage that to occur? Because you're quite right, there is going to be a need for families to want to be in these more urban areas, and they need the amenities and the space to be able to live there well. One of the things that we want to do through the housing strategy is figure out what is the best practices that are out there to encourage those types of units being available. And then as the development applications come along, how do we prescribe that? So there's a number of things that we need to look at as we continue to proceed through not just our housing strategy, but our OP update, and work with the development industry as well. Mr. Garvey?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a point of, in addition to the conversation, this is another area where the province could be of assistance, because the current formulas, and probably those around the table know this better than I, but the formula of how they fund schools needs to catch up with an urban setting. It's more costly in the urban areas to build than a greenfield situation. So there needs to be rethinking on the province's part on their funding formula for new schools.
Yeah, thank you. I'd specifically be concerned around Midtown, where land is such a premium. Are they going to be able to get the sports fields and things like that? But I don't need an answer on that. I think we're aware of that, but it's certainly a concern. I'll just flip over to maybe a bit of a policy question. So we've learned the 24,000 that are under review. Now, those 24,000, they would sort of be, I guess, subject to our existing policy. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So any sort of incentives, or like, let's say inclusionary zoning is one of the few tools we can use to help drive down costs. We also heard about incentivizing family-friendly units. It could even be exclusionary zoning or community planning permits or encouraging timber frame. So any of that type of incentives or policies, we wouldn't be able to use for that block of 24,000 that already have an application in. Is that correct?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I wouldn't say it's impossible. It might be challenging, but through ongoing discussions with the development industry where there are opportunities to improve upon that, we would certainly look to take those opportunities.
Okay, so I think my recommendation would sort of the list that we're making of good best practices, we need to figure out how to get those in place, almost like yesterday, because we've already sort of got this group of 24,000, that leaves maybe 10,000 that haven't submitted an application that we can apply that policy to. So that's my suggestion, but through your worship, that's all for me.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Lischina?
Thank you, Worship. Good evening, Dr. Moffat. Your slide deck caused me to think about a few issues, and so I have some questions for you. The slide where you mentioned involuntary housed, if we take a look at the population pyramid of Canada, and obviously the reason we have all this immigration is because it's bottom heavy of the older population. So do you have any data of how many in Ontario, I guess, that would be this group of older adults living in a home that's got 4 bedrooms and they don't have that next level to go to? Do we know how big that number is?
I don't offhand, but that should be calculated, because that is available in the census. So I have not run those numbers, but it's got to at least be in the tens of thousands, given the age of the baby boomers, and yeah. So unfortunately, I don't have
Okay.
those
Nope, that's
exact
okay.
numbers. I should. It's an interesting question. I should run that sometime.
So next question. So you mentioned about the lack of innovation in the housing industry. Has your group taken a look at other jurisdictions across the world, whether it's Europe or Asia, to see what is best practice and with respect to building faster and better, or however you want to describe that?
Yeah, so we're currently undergoing a project in conjunction with Western University and a few other universities to answer that exact question.
Okay.
And we're finding the bottlenecks are a few things. So, for instance, that lack of the difficulty in getting insurance for mass timber projects, for example, that countries that build mass timber well, in part, have more advanced insurance policies for these types of projects. So that is certainly one area to look at. Another is policies in the building code that make it easier for prefab construction. So a lot of the issues that hinder innovation are this combination of insurance bottlenecks plus issues in the building code. So, classic example in North America, both Canada and the United States, is that in apartment buildings, high-rise apartment buildings, we require 2 staircases which prevents certain type of buildings from being built for obvious safety reasons. But the European building codes tend to be more flexible. So if you have sprinkler systems involved, you don't need that second staircase, and that allows for larger units and different designs. So those, I think, are if I'm looking at best practices, I think those are the 2 areas that we need to look at most, is the building code side and the insurance side, because that really limits what can be built and the pace of innovation.
And so would you be suggesting that it's the province and the federal government that need to get that moving?
It is mostly on them. So the federal government plays the largest role through the National Building Code, which again is voluntary, but sets the basis for a lot of provincial building codes, and as well for the CMHC, who could provide an insurance backstop for some of these novel technologies. And actually, the third thing I would add is we have innovation superclusters for things like plant proteins. And I'm a fan of lentils. I think that's a fantastic thing. We don't have a housing innovation supercluster. And I think that might be something that we need to look at. And perhaps the federal government will scoop me on that idea and we'll see it next week. But I do find it surprising all of the areas in the country that we have an innovation policy on, but there's no housing innovation policy. And I think that is a big missing link.
Okay, my next point. Can you comment on the provincial movement, the cyclical nature of it? Because I recall about, 10 years, the last oil boom, tons of people left Ontario, went to work there. Did those people come back? Or, is this change that's happening now, is that a cyclical thing?
So part of that might be on the Alberta side, just because oil prices were relatively high last year. But what I would suggest is it's probably overall not, because we're not just losing. If we were just losing population to Alberta, we could say, okay, well, the oil and gas industry is doing quite well, but we're losing population to pretty much every province except Manitoba for whatever reason. So I think this is more. I think this is. I've been in Winnipeg many times. It's a lovely place. I don't know what Ontarians have against it, but overall, just given how widespread this is, that I expect this to continue again, unless something strange happens to housing prices and we start to get closer aligned, that Ontario and Alberta prices become more aligned, then you might start to see this slow down.
And last question, since you're in the university environment, the issue of international students, that was a huge boom prior to COVID. COVID did have an effect on that. Considering that there's many programs are now online across the world, so you don't have that movement. Is that what you're seeing as well?
So that's what we saw up until September, and now it's largely gone back in person. And I think one of the things we have to understand about the international student boom is, yes, they are here to get an education, but it's also a pathway to permanent residency. That a lot of the students coming in want to immigrate to Canada, and it's actually one of the most attractive pathways to gain permanent residency is through the university and college system. So, and that's hard to do if you're not physically located here. So we are still seeing some technical programs that are somewhat specialized, where you do have high levels of virtual attendance, and actually business schools, particularly MBAs, like what I teach, are one of the exceptions where you do have significant virtual attendance. It really has shifted more back to in person, again, because it's in part used as a pathway to permanent residency.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Lischina. Councillor Elgar?
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Burton. First, I'd like to thank the town staff for the report, because I think they hit the nail on the head. When they didn't say we have a housing crisis, they said we have a crisis of housing affordability. And I think that's kind of like, I think they nailed it when they said that. It's really about affordability. I'll start off with the questions. Hopefully staff can help me out here, because I was reading the report that they changed the definition of what affordable housing is, from what I understand. And maybe staff can explain and help me understand, but in Brampton, they said that previously it worked out in their case, if a house was $400,000, then that was the peak for affordable housing. But under the new program, Brampton has calculated affordable housing is $800,000, up to, which also means there's no development charges, anything up to that amount in Brampton. Can TAF explain, is that true, or is that just a total misrepresentation that I've written?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I can't speak to the exact numbers, and I certainly am not familiar with the Brampton case, but through Bill 23, the definition of affordability was changed, and it was related more to market. Previously, there was a definition in provincial policy statement that identified what affordability was and how that would be defined for the purposes of the PPS. One of the comments that we had made to this council and to the province was to go back to that PPS definition, which was something which was more clear and wasn't related necessarily to market forces.
So the previous was what? It was 30% of the gross household income was the amount that had to be spent for housing, whether it be rental or purchase. Is that what it was?
That sounds correct to me, yes.
And now, under the development charges portion of Bill 24, is it now 80% of the price of a house?
Yes, I think that is the way that they define it, based on the region within where the housing is.
That is a bit different. I would have to agree. With the development charges, where is it written that the developer has to pass on any savings on development charges to the purchaser?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, so there isn't anything as defined that way that we've seen. If Commissioner Sully wants to assist, we can certainly speak to how Bill 23 changed the DC structure in terms of the deductions. But beyond that, there wasn't anything that required developers to pass on the difference.
So with the changes in 30% of your household income going to 80% of the value of a house, if that charge is taken off, does that make a house in Oakville at all affordable, even though we can't collect development charges, in your estimation?
Through Mr. Mayor, you're getting well beyond my capacity at this point, Councillor, but I think what we've seen is being able to rely more on the way the PPS had defined affordability was more equitable across the province than the way Bill 23 has now framed it.
Yeah, that seems, what you're saying is exactly how Brampton phrased it also, that it won't help anybody be more affordable housing at that rate. Okay? In another report, they say that this new Bill 23 will reduce the supply of truly affordable housing also, because now I understand, maybe you can help me out, 5% of the units is all that has to be affordable supposedly going forward, even though it's a totally different baseline now for what is affordable. Is that correct?
Yes, that was one of the changes that came through Bill 23, that there was different rules or regulations that the province could put forward and how it would. It wouldn't allow municipalities to go beyond a certain percentage requirement.
So
they
right now,
basically
what
capped
can
it.
Oakville do? Can Oakville, it could go with like 10%, no problem, and demand that?
I don't know, through Mr. Mayor, if that necessarily would be the way it would work. We would probably need to look into that a little bit more to be able to come back to council with an answer.
Because that has quite an impact also. Now, the task force, they did say that there's already 88,000 acres available and designated for growth in the Greater Toronto Hamilton area. And there's over 250,000 new homes and apartments that were already approved in 2019 that haven't even been, nothing's happened yet. Like, wonder whether Mr. Moffat can comment on that based on the report that came out from this special group.
Yeah, it's a good question. So I think we need better data on that, but absolutely, there is a lot of land available. We've seen the RPCO, and I know Dr. Kevin Eby had a report stating that there's more than enough land under current urban growth boundaries to build. I think Dr. Eby's numbers were about 2 million homes across the province at reasonable densities. So, the research, so I have to admit, I haven't personally studied it, but researchers, some of my colleagues have and published reports on this. They're saying it's doable, and I have no reason to doubt them.
Okay, because that's what the task force actually stated in their report, apparently. So, yeah, they're supposedly the experts. So, I just look, and I go to Parkland for a minute. I'm just trying to understand, and hopefully you could help me, how Parkland calculations have changed. If it's a 5-story building or a 50-story building, what has changed from what was before and what's new in Bill 23 to help people understand. And basically, because I heard Mike Moffat say, we need complete households, we need schools, and he said parks. But if I have a 5-story building or a 50-story building or an 80-story building, I understand on the new calculation, it doesn't matter. It's based on the footprint of the area. Is that correct?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, what the bill did was it cut in half the parkland dedication requirement, both for land dedication as well as cash in lieu. So cash in lieu is now capped at 1 to 1,000. Land was capped at 1 to 500, basically as the alternative rate. In addition to that, the province included a cap on parkland at either 10% or 15%, depending on the size of the property. So regardless of what the number or the formula may otherwise say the number should be, there's still a cap on it at the end of the day.
Sorry, there is no cap or there is a cap? There is a cap, correct. Based on the acreage, basically, of the footprint of the land, not of the number of stories going up.
Correct.
That, which corresponds to the number of people. Okay, what else did I have? I guess we're not looking for comments yet, Mr. Mayor. We're just looking for questions to be answered at this point. Oh. Yeah. I guess a resident sent in and said, this whole thing is not about this isn't about, what was it here? I got to get the exact words. Simply removing DCs does not make the unit affordable in the amount of the DC, which I agree. And he also says it's like a wealth transfer where the public will pay more, he said, whether it be the municipal, the provincial, or the federal on taxes, and the developer is the winner. And that's what they're feeling. So, okay, I appreciate the answers. You're helping me understand that Bill 23 is pretty scary for a taxpayer in Oakville. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor, for your questions and your comments. Next up is Councillor O'Meara.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm not sure where to attack this, so I guess I'm going to ask Dr. Moffat, first of all, for your comments on this, because we seem to have jumped to the solution really quick here, and the conversation has been about, well, we've got a problem, and let's just build on top of each other, because that's the solution. Are you aware of any conversations or any strategy or any sort of ideas? 50% of Canadians live below the 76-degree meridian. Is there any conversation at the province on how we spread our growth out, on how we build institutions like yours or institutions to have more doctors or nurses outside of that line that kind of cuts across Tobermory over to the East Coast? Have you heard of any ways? I mean, it wasn't too long ago, our regional counterparts in Ontario were bemoaning the fact that all their young people were leaving to go to the urban area, and they wanted them to go back. I mean, we talked about internet. Are you aware of any conversations to try and spread some of the growth out in Ontario, I guess, to non-OHL team areas?
I'm not aware of that, and I would say that we have these municipal housing targets that specifically apply to 29 municipalities, all in Southern Ontario, and I think collectively they are just over 1.2 of the 1.5 million homes. So it does seem that the target is to build more homes in the communities that are already either large and or growing.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, and also, I guess where some of the developers have the most expensive land to build on right now, that might be a coincidence or not as well. I appreciate that, and I think we should maybe look at that a little bit more, but we might be getting ahead of ourselves here. I have a question with regards to, and this might be more to staff. How are we going to be judged? I think in the very last point 50 of our pledge here, that we're going to be held account on municipalities whether we achieve and exceed our housing pledge levels and growth targets. So just to be clear, is that we've done our job, we've issued approvals for X amount, we're done? Or are we going to be judged based upon whether the homes are built and they've been inspected by town inspectors and that's done? How are we being judged on what this pledge is committing us to do?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, interesting question, very good question. I don't know that I necessarily have an answer to that, other than to say the province has put forth a regulation that will require all of the 29 municipalities to report on a series of metrics of how we are doing against the pledge. So whether that means there's people living in them, or we've just simply said, yep, they're approved, they're ready to go, it's up to the builder now. That isn't abundantly clear to me, and it's certainly something that we can look into a little bit more, and hopefully we'll have some more answers for council as we do our first reporting.
Okay, thank you for that. And I just would like a clarification, because I believe I heard from our CAO that the pledge is non-binding at the beginning. The pledge is just a pledge. But then I also did hear from the mayor that if we don't do the pledge, we've got a gun to our heads in terms of money coming to us. So I'm trying to find out, is this a binding pledge or not? Because I'm kind of hearing two different things on that front.
Councillor, the minister wrote to the Association of Municipalities of Ontario on November 30th, and that's part of an official relationship between the ministry and the Association of Municipalities who represent us. Indeed, we're a member of that. And in item 50 of the draft pledge letter is a direct quote from what the minister said. And it appears to me to say they don't want anybody who, they don't want anybody to suffer financial loss under Bill 23 if they have made the pledge. And so I believe the plain meaning of that sentence is, if you pledge, we'll make you whole, and if you don't, we won't. And the pledge is still properly described as voluntary because it has no operational basis. It merely is it's a statement from us and the other 28 municipalities to say whether or not we're going to try to achieve the target of approvals that they've set us. And if I could just pick up on another part of your statement, the pledge as drafted only signs us up to do the approvals part. It carefully stresses that we don't build them. And for that matter, we can only approve them if they apply for them. Now, as you know, and as you've seen, we have enough in the pipeline to believe that, well, they are applying for them. So the proposition boils down to, we're going to get those units under our official plan, whether we approve them or the OLT approves them, because if they're within spec of our official plan, they'll get approved one way or the other. And if we haven't pledged, we won't be made whole. And if we have, they say they will. Now, if you have trouble believing the minister, then you could rephrase what I said as, if you don't pledge, you absolutely won't get any money. And if you do pledge, you might get the money. But either way, the taxpayer is at stake on whether or not we pledge.
Well, thank you for that, Your Worship, and I believe it does clear the point that one of those two statements don't jive. Either, and I think it's almost a pledge of fealty rather than a pledge of let's build houses here. But again, I will not digress down that path. I guess my last question from staff. My worry and my concern is that this pledge will be held against us if things don't go the way that we're out of our hands. And I don't know what wording we've got in here that makes sure that we are being upfront and direct with the province, that we realize we do not build the houses. We realize that we do not control the interest rates. And we realize, more importantly, which I don't think we've mentioned here, we don't decide when to list them for sale or pull them off of for sale because the market's being flooded and devaluing them. So I guess where are we being upfront in this document, letting the province know that we're not bearing the lead on that? And I think that's my concern, is there a better way that we can be very upfront and direct so that we're not going to be, held, well, things happened and you guys made a pledge, but it wasn't our doing, I think. I don't read those parts that are really important to getting houses built in this document. That's not our responsibility. It's not coming too clear to me, I guess, is my question.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, if council wishes to include such verbiage into that, staff can certainly assist in the drafting of adding those kinds of caveats into the pledge. We're here to assist.
Okay, thank you very much, Director. Thank you, Your Worship.
Councillor, at the appropriate time, I'll be happy to read you the clauses and the sentences in the draft letter that I believe actually do what you're asking.
It's okay, Your Worship. I've read the document. I'm just saying we're burying the lead on this, and we're not being very forthright. It's on point 40 or 50 or 32 or what. I don't think it's the emphasis that we should be having on what I think is the crux of this pledge and the crux of the problem behind this pledge. That's my only comment on that.
Well, maybe you'd like to propose wording?
I'd be happy to work on something, Your Worship. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Nanda?
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, Director, for your presentation, and also Dr. Moffat. For Dr. Moffat, I have a question about, has anyone factored into multi-generational families living together? So what we've seen, especially up in the north, is an uptick of newcomers coming, but they're coming as multi-generational. And now with less affordability, more multi-generational families have to live together. And now that we've seen skilled workers and other populations leave our province to go to other provinces, is there going to be a concern because of the density that's going to be built for this pledge, for us to be able to hold up this pledge, that we're going to make smaller units, therefore families are not going to be able to fit into those units. So again, they're going to look into other places and space for their families to live. And is this something that the province should look into, or something that we should put into the pledge, that we should be looking at the demographics that are coming and how we're able to actually house them?
Yeah, I do think ideally that this target should be more granular, right? That there is a big difference between building 1.5 million high-rise studio suites and sort of a variety of housing types of various affordability levels and sizes and so on. So I do think there's work to be done in the future, and ideally that work would have been done already, to indicate not just the number of units, but the type of units, the price points, and so on. But right now, the target treats all units as identical, regardless of the size or cost.
So do you see a concern that over the next 10 years, we may lose a larger number of population? Because
if we don't get the unit mix right, absolutely. That if what is built is a lot of studio apartments and there isn't enough family-friendly housing, then yes, families will leave.
And so I don't know, maybe for staff, if we have something like that in the pledge, or we have something where, again, if we're asking the province to make us whole and we have these families coming, and they have different needs, infrastructure needs, and if we want to keep families here, kids who need schools or other facilities, that we would like to keep them whole, because we would also like to keep some of those people in Ontario.
Councillor, there is no language in the draft pledge to do that. But I would invite you to, at the appropriate time, move an amendment to add language, and you could take it from Dr. Moffat, who said several different times that we need more granular targets to cover the spectrum of family needs. In the draft pledge, there already is language to the not as direct and blunt as Dr. Moffat said, but there is a line that says, there's quite a bit here about we need to do the full spectrum, and but it doesn't say multi-generational families, it just says the full spectrum. You may be able to be content with that, but if you want to add this more specific thing, that would be a good place to put whatever you chose to move as an amendment.
Thank you. And
And,
so I can do that.
and we'll get to that.
Yeah.
We're not there now.
Yeah, thank you.
I believe that next is Councillor Knoll.
Thank you, Worship. Thank you for all the questions so far. You kept taking mine and then I kept deleting them. So I've got a few more have come out of the conversation though, with some good questions so far. First of all, to Dr. Moffat, I'm just curious about the Affordability Task Force last year. One of the outcomes of the Affordability Task Force was the increase in, I guess, a disincentive tax on the part of the province for foreign investment in purchasing private residences and I'm curious how that has that had any impact to this point? Or, and I guess the other piece of that is the additional taxes that, no, I guess that's the piece that's been implemented. And then what the outlook is for the vacant house tax that, for example, Toronto is implementing. Is there anticipation that those are going to have any impact on this issue, this larger issue?
So we haven't. It's too early to tell on the foreign buyers tax. On the vacant units tax, there is actually some experience we can draw from there, just because both British Columbia and the city of Vancouver have had that for some time. There's one study, and unfortunately, I'm blanking on the authors, that found for most unit types, it didn't have much of an effect, with the one exception being one bedroom and studio suites in high-rise apartments. Those did see a cost reduction relative to the price changes of other units by about 5 to 6%. So it was meaningful. It didn't create massive levels of affordability, but it certainly did move the needle, because it got, partly because some of those units were rented out to avoid the tax, and others were sold to avoid the tax. So policies like that can play a marginal difference, and can help buy some time to get the needed units built.
And the non-resident tax, you said we don't have enough history on that to really determine if it's having an impact.
Correct. I have yet to see any studies on its impact.
Okay. You touched on the issue around the need for federal tax reform as a part of this overall package of requirements to help resolve this issue or to deal with this issue. Could you expand on that a little bit? Like what are we looking at in terms of federal tax reform? I hadn't heard that suggestion before.
Yeah, so there's a few provisions that you could use. So in the past, the government has used accelerated capital cost allowance provisions that basically allowed builders of purpose-built rentals to depreciate for tax reasons those buildings faster, and allowed them to keep the benefits of that depreciation after sale, so long as they were using the proceeds of that to build more units. That has that has a long and checkered history. The research does show that it does build more units, but it also tends to some of the income benefits of that tend to go to the type of people who can afford to build high-rise apartments. So there's one New York City family in particular who did very well on that tax treatment that goes by the last name of Trump, and that tends to be why that tax has an interesting history. But I do think there is an area for the federal government to, for instance, say, look, we know we need more family-friendly units, and we know we need them more climate-friendly. So if you are building a building that meets certain set of criteria, you might be eligible for this accelerated capital cost allowance. So is just one suggestion of a tweak of the rules that we used to have in the 1960s and 1970s, when we built a lot more purpose-built rental than we do now.
Is this an academic recommendation, or is there work being done on this right now?
There's been a few papers basically looking at the impact of that of those taxes and those tax removals back in the 1960s and 1970s. I haven't seen any groups who have studied what, say, the fiscal impact of bringing that back would be, but I have seen groups advocating a return to, again, some of those 1960s and 1970s style tax provisions.
Okay. On that train of questioning with respect to the federal government, I know there's been a lot of talk about more cooperation between the federal government and the provinces on trying to find more holistic solutions. What's the progress on that front?
I have to admit, I don't I don't know. I haven't seen much of a change. Obviously, we've had some joint announcements, more between the federal government and municipalities, like the housing accelerator announcement made on Friday with Mayor Guthrie of Guelph. But so far, I haven't seen a lot of movement on provincial-federal cooperation in the housing space.
That's a shame. With respect to the actual pledge that is being proposed today, I think that Councillor O'Meara teased out most of what I was looking for in this respect, and this is probably more to staff than to you, Dr. Moffat. I'm curious, is there anything in the pledge that we are not already obligated to do by virtue of Bill 23 and or Bill 108? Are we giving anything up as a result of this pledge, over and above what's already required of us under current provincial legislation?
Through Mr. Mayor, I don't think so. I think what the pledge does clearly is articulate what are those things that for which we're responsible and how are we executing those items. So I don't think it really goes beyond that, but it also, in terms of our responsibility, beyond that, it is saying we can only deliver and do what you're asking us to do in partnership with others.
Right. So it's essentially establishing that we're going to do what the legislation requires, but sets out the parameters of how we need to achieve that. Okay. Now, I think this is already clarified. Is the pledge isn't necessarily carved in stone? Would that be accurate?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, yes, and you're correct, and I think the mayor had alluded to this earlier. When we say it's a non-binding, doesn't hold the same weight as statute, for example, but it really becomes an agreement of sorts.
What's the enforceability of the agreement, other than the fact that we've had this suggestion that we wouldn't get funding for infrastructure if we don't sign the pledge? So if we're down the road in the pledge 2 years down the road and we're not able to meet our obligations under that, is there a poison pill that we're aware of at this point?
Through Mr. Mayor, I don't know that I'll say that there's a poison pill. There is a requirement for us to continue to report to the province on our success and how we're meeting the target, or are we doing what we say we were going to do. Beyond that, it's really in the hands of the province after that.
Yeah. Councillor, if I could supplement the answer. When you're dealing with the level of government that in the Constitution creates and abolishes us, we are always at some jeopardy that they will keep their word, right? So the reason that that's not important is they're saying, if you don't pledge, we absolutely won't pay you. And if you do pledge, we will. And as I said earlier, if you don't trust them, then the proposition is, if you don't pledge, we won't pay you. And if you do, we might. But either way, the taxpayer is to the good if he's made whole.
Right. That's the conclusion I'm reaching from this this conversation, since this has all come up months ago. The last piece on this is in terms of the pledge, and so there's obviously at this point there is no clarity around a poison pill, but the province can do what they want to us when they want to. Do we have any understanding that the province is also understanding themselves of changing conditions? Has that been, I mean, obviously a pledge is a snapshot in time based on the conditions today, based on the expectations of, the solutions to these opinions, these problems, whether right or wrong. But is there an understanding, or do you believe there's an understanding that if conditions change, that they will allow us to amend the pledge appropriately?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, and I think as you said, Councillor, it really is a reflection of what we're doing already. Right. And we continue to update our official plan. We continue to do the things that are within our purview as to the best of our abilities. We'll be reporting to the province as well on how things are going, but we also know that the province has there's at least 5 phases to this angle that they're taking, and I think Bill 23 was the third of these. More is to be seen. So whether those next phases from the province are in reflection to how things are changing, whether that's the market realities, supply chain shortages, labor challenges, that remains to be seen.
Okay, that was very helpful. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Knoll. I believe that next is Councillor Grant.
Thank you very much. And on top of my mind too is rental units. Somewhat germane because this afternoon, actually, Councillor Knoll and I were having a discussion with a potential developer who was talking about, well, they're going to build condos or they're going to build rentals. And obviously, rentals are more popular because it favors a developer who wants to get in and get out quickly, make as much money as they can. But if one does the math, if we are going to talk about housing as a system, we need to have more rental units available for people, for shift workers, for young professionals, for young and new families. But in looking into this, since the mayor was nice enough to send something from rental.ca on Friday that showed Oakville was number 4th highest of renting in Canada, pretty much. In looking at this, it looks like the province stopped doing purpose-built rental housing planning availability for us years ago. And I'm just wondering, if we are looking at zoning, is there some way that the province is considering this at some point, do you think?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, if you're saying, or if you're asking, can we force the rental to come to market? No.
Right.
We encourage, absolutely. We have policies in our plan that say that we want to ensure that we have a healthy rental stock. We have policies that certainly discourage condominium conversion. In other words, taking a rental property and converting that to condominium. So we certainly we're aware of the need to ensure that there's rental opportunities, and we do what we can for that to be maintained. And whether that's through existing development applications, we do have discussions with applicants when they come in. If there's opportunities to provide rental as part of it, those are all good things for the community itself.
And I guess better, again, I'm better on paper than I'm speaking out in public, but the point I'm trying to make is that I think it was back when MASH was playing, as we heard earlier, purpose-built rental housing zoning was allowed. It was stopped because it was believed that it was used to segregate certain financial and different groups. But if the province is now looking at getting us to build more stock that people can afford and use, has there been any indication that they may change their zoning laws back to allow for this?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, not to my knowledge.
So we're back to what Dr. Moffat has suggested in speaking to Councillor Knoll about better tax incentives from the federal government. Okay, all right. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Grant. I'd like to just stress what I find I often say. This is not the only meeting we're ever going to have, and this is not the only message we're ever going to send. And the messages that you're indicating are well worth sending. And perhaps at the appropriate time, after we've worked on it, we could do that. Let me turn now to the next in the list, Councillor Adams.
Thanks very much. Many of the points and discussion areas that I'm interested in have already been covered by my colleagues. I won't cover those again. I just wanted to bring up one particular issue, which is because of the DC phase-in transition period that is part of the provisions of Bill 23, I understand that the region is now currently losing $14,000 per greenfield SDE and $10,000 just about for each single detached equivalent built within the built boundary because of that 80% cap that we have. Given that the region has no pledge requirement, all the pledges are done at the local level. Is there any way of knowing that we're going to be made whole on the region's basis too? Because just on the 33,000 units that we have, assuming they're SDEs, they're not really exactly SDEs because they're housing units, but I mean, it could be hundreds of millions of dollars in losses at the region, which we end up as property taxpayers covering that. I know in Part 50 of this pledge, it talks about the need to be made whole by the province, but is there any discussion about being made whole for the regional element where there is no pledge?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I haven't been party to those conversations. Certainly when we're looking at our development charges, we need to be closely aligned with the region in terms of how we're delivering the infrastructure and how it's being paid for. I'll see if Commissioner Sully has not had any of those discussions either.
Okay, so it's, I mean, that information is part of the DC indexing information that's coming up on the region's report on Wednesday.
Councillor, if you'd speak more to your microphone, we could hear you.
You'd be able to hear me better? Very well. So that's part of the regional DC indexing report on Wednesday. And so that's where that information is coming from. And so I don't know what the magnitude of the dollars are involved, but they're huge. And I recognize it doesn't have a part to play necessarily specifically with the pledge and whether we have the ability to have 33,000 homes built in Oakville, but it has a big part to play with respect to the region's ability to fund the infrastructure. And so I think we capture that in our ask around, and our need to rely on the minister's letter, but that's it's real. It's coming at us now.
Councillor, I'm not aware of any suggestion by the province like the letter to AMO with regard to the upper tier municipalities. And as you know, at the same time they unleashed this, they unleashed a review of what we need to have in the upper tier. So I would say this is a fluid situation and another opportunity for further discussion and advocacy by us and our associations. I've agreed with a suggestion from one of our colleagues to improve the language of number 32 to try to capture this being made whole question more explicitly and more plainly. And so why don't we wait till we get to the item to see where we go with that. Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Haslett-Deal.
Thank you, Mayor Burton. Thank you to all my council colleagues for their great questions. I'm going to try not to ask repeats. So my first question is to Dr. Moffat. So Dr. Moffat, I had the privilege of reading your article called Baby Needs a Home. And I will give you credit that you are consistent in your messaging in all the papers that you have written. I just want to highlight and make sure that it's clear to my council colleagues and myself. In the document, you make a fairly lengthy statement about how you're not recommending a specific change in policies, et cetera, but you go on to say it's not simply enough to say that 1 million new homes must be built in the next 10 years to meet the demand from projected household formations. What gets built and where it gets built are vitally important details. And when I mentioned how consistent you are, so then tonight you mentioned a detailed breakdown of the type of housing units needed, size, type, price, et cetera, that is, you pretty much said essential. A unit is not a unit, and the greatest need is for family-sized as well as senior-friendly housing to make sure that things are child-friendly. So first of all, I want to thank you for that on behalf of my young adults and my hopefully future grandchildren, because I sure hope that the folks that supported your writing of that report read it. So my question to you is, what was the reaction of developers when you expressed to them the importance of changing the way they approach house building?
Yeah, I think overall, I think they recognize that fact, and again, just like this discussion, about needing 1.5 million homes is one thing to sort of recognize you need to change, and another thing to actually make that change. But I know from the discussions I have, particularly on the builder side, they are very worried about the lack of skilled tradespeople, and I think they recognize that or at least many of them recognize that building, doubling the number of skilled trade people in order to double the number of homes probably isn't practical. So I think they are looking to find ways to become more productive themselves. I think they sort of recognize that necessity, but we haven't seen that in action too much yet. Again, with the exception of some of these projects, like the two mass timber projects that we're seeing in Toronto. There's an area where we're seeing some increased innovation and productivity. So these things are happening, but not at the, I think, scale that's necessary.
So thank you for that. But for some clarity, did they have a reaction to the fact that the size of the units, and I think you expressed, it might be one of the other speakers, that building all of these studios or single units is not what the market demands? Is there an acknowledgement that that the marketplace has changed and the family needs have changed?
Yeah, I think they sort of certainly, well, again, I don't want to speak for all developers, but I think at least among some of them is, yeah, they do recognize that there is a need to build a variety of units. In their view, they may feel that they're constrained again by building codes and a variety of things, but ultimately, for the for-profit builders, they're going to build what gets them the greatest rate of return. I mean, that's ultimately why they exist. And I think the role for public policy is that we can adjust that, again, through things like accelerated capital cost allowance and zoning rules to alter relative rates of returns of different types of units. And then finally, there's a role for government to just recognize that there are a bunch of types of units that the private industry is never going to build. And there is a role for public housing and other forms to ensure those gaps, those very real gaps that are left by the market are filled by government.
Okay, thank you for that. In terms of our pledge, have you had an opportunity to read Appendix 3, the revision of what our pledge is, our proposed pledge is? And do you have any comments on it if you have?
I apologize. I have not read it.
Okay, thank you. I mean, you clearly have expertise, and I wondered if you could add something to it. My next questions are to Director Charles. One of the pieces that residents have spoken to me about is the importance of livability, and that the document needs, that we need to in some way address what Dr. Moffat has said is important, what others around the table have suggested is important, which is that I hate calling them units because they're supposed to be homes, but homes need to be built that have, and we need to have an ability to be more prescriptive about the size of units, the number of bedrooms, in order to meet that challenge of family-friendly housing. In our OP, do we have sufficient language to enable us to do that for our community?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, there is language in our official plan, and I admit it can always be better. And as I was stating earlier, we continue to refine those policies as well. It is something that we had reflected in the draft Midtown OPA, the need for family-friendly units, we'll call them. The other piece is as part of the overall housing strategy that we're continuing to work towards, and to be able to give council some of those tools that we can point to say, here's ways in which we think we can be more persuasive in terms of getting those family sized units. There's a number of things that we're looking at, that we're thinking about. And we continue to refine our OP policies, as I mentioned. So we'll have to keep working on that so that council has more of that confidence.
Is there an opportunity to put that in the pledge, or wording in the pledge that would send a message about the importance of our ability to do that as a municipality in your professional planning perspective?
Councillor, if you'd forgive me. ever since you suggested that earlier, I've been reflecting on it, and I believe that there is in fact a way to do it. And when we get to that, I'll show it to you.
Mayor Burton, I would love that, thank you. Okay. I see Doug Carr is on the line, and I don't want to, well, I'm going to, so what the hey, you all know I'm going to do it anyhow. Number 50 in the pledge does read a letter from the Minister Amo, and the interpretation of that has been expressed to us quite clearly that, and I'm going to read it, that there should be no funding shortfall for housing enabling infrastructure as a result of Bill 23, provided the municipalities achieve and exceed their housing pledge levels and growth targets, unquote. My question to legal counsel is, if they've already stated that we need to hit 33,000, is that then can be interpreted as the pledge, and therefore it is not an actual pledge document, but rather that we achieve the number?
Do you mean of approvals?
Of approvals, thank you.
Sorry, through you, Mayor Burton. I apologize, Councillor. I'm not sure I understand the distinction you're making.
So what I'm asking is, when they use the phrase exceed their housing pledge levels, are they talking about a written pledge document, or can the interpretation be that the pledge level is the 33,000 we have to hit, which they've mandated to us, and therefore if we hit it, this risk of losing infrastructure dollars is not there?
Through you, Mayor Burton, I'll do my best to answer that. I interpret this letter to be the pledge, which represents the town's commitment to achieve the provincial policy objective, to achieve the to address the housing crisis. And to me, it clearly indicates that this is our pledge to facilitate the delivery of 33,000. So to me, it's clear that our role is to facilitate the delivery, not to actually be responsible on our own to construct. So this to me represents our commitment to facilitate the delivery of 33,000. Am I answering your question?
Not quite. So the letter itself, I agree, is a written pledge. But do we have to provide a written pledge? Can we exceed the housing pledge levels and growth targets? Would that satisfy that statement? Because the interpretation is that the funding that the province has committed to keeping us whole with is at risk if we do not give them a written pledge document. I just want to have clarity that it is that they absolutely require this written document, not just that we achieve what's already been advised we can achieve. I think there's a different interpretation here.
Yeah, thank you. I understand you better now. Yes, my interpretation is we must provide a written pledge that reflects that by the 22nd of March.
Thank you, Mr. Carr. I appreciate the legal opinion. It does help me. Okay, so then my other question is about DC shortfalls. And Director Charles, you knew I was going to ask this. So of the numbers that we are planned to achieve, what is the DC shortfall that we will experience as a result of Bill 23? And I see Commissioner Sully coming to the rescue.
Through you, Mayor Burton, we did do some preliminary analysis based on the 33,000 units and the mix of the housing. I do have to state some caveats, though, to the analysis. It's predicated on the units being approved exactly as being submitted, and we know that over time, what actually gets built often changes from the original submission. It also is predicated on the timing of when these applications come in. And so looking at that, we have analyzed and we see an impact on DCs of between 19 and $24 million a year. This doesn't include any potential changes in our next bylaw as far as land that will be ineligible or studies that would be ineligible. It does include the assumption that the region used for affordable housing. So that is in there. But right now, just based on preliminary analysis, assuming everything got approved and built as in the pipeline right now, we estimate the impact to be about 19 million a year.
So 19 to 24 million a year that the province would have to make up for us. And does that include the staging in of the 5-year phase-in of the DCs?
It includes the 5-year phase-in of the DCs. It includes the exempt affordable housing assumptions that we've got, the purpose-built rental unit assumptions. It does not include land. It also does not include parkland, so it's just development charges.
Okay. Thank you for doing that additional work. I think those numbers help us just appreciate the accountability that we're looking for the province to come through with. Mayor Burton, those are my questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Shi.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for the presentation. I have one question. The first question for Dr. Moffat. So in your deck, I think one slide there is talking about how expensive in Ontario. So I noticed that there is a lack of the data from York Region, Toronto, City of Toronto. So is there any purpose that you don't have all those data?
Oh, yes. So I didn't include the GTA, but obviously GTA and the City of Toronto would be even higher. It was more designed to illustrate the cost between Toronto and Ontario and other parts of other parts of Canada. I think it should be well established that the City of Toronto is quite expensive.
Okay, understand. Okay, thank you. So I have another question for Director. So, Mr. Director, I noticed from the pledge, so the town incorporates a new OMDC. So how does this OMDC add to the town's rental and affordable housing opportunity?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we see the MDC as having the ability, where appropriate, to through its work to bring to market rental stock, whether that's part of a joint venture, whether that's just as a pure sale based on conditions, et cetera. Because it is an arm's length corporation of the town, there's the ability to provide some more parameters, we'll say, around the type of development that the OMDC may be in charge of.
Okay, so that means, this corporation's dealing with all the land owned by town, right? And do you have any percentage of the planning, so how many, so what the percentage, so we will build the houses, affordable houses for this farm town land?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, there's a number of sites that the OMDC has looked at. The public works site is probably the best one to illustrate where the planning work that was done, the master planning work, which was done several years ago, handed over to the OMDC to say this is the master plan for this site, and it should include things such as affordable housing, rental housing, other types of supportive housing could be part of that mandate for the MDC to deliver.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Shi. Council, I believe that we've exhausted our questions, and I would like to recess the meeting for a few minutes to incorporate the many suggestions that I heard in your questions into the draft pledge, and then we'll put it up on the screen for you to see the degree to which I've captured your concerns. And you've been sitting a long time. A bio break might very well be welcome. And when we resume, so that our registered delegation has and I'm going to put him off too, so that he has the opportunity to see the final product rather than delegating before it, if you see my notion of fairness here. So it's 9:39. Knowing our technology, it's going to take more than 3 minutes. So I'm gonna propose that we resume at 10 p.m.
Mayor Burton,
Yes.
if I could just make a request on whether or not you still require the attendance of Dr. Moffat in the meeting when we resume.
Thank you. I believe we can release Dr. Moffat with our thanks for his contributions to our understanding of the macro level of this problem. And we truly appreciate the time you made available to us, sir.
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you for having me.
And I can tell council that it's been a pleasure working with him on the Ontario Big Mayors Caucus. So big city mayors, as they like to call themselves, but we don't use the word city. All right, so council is recessed until 10 p.m. That's 20 minutes. Council and public, we're back in session from our technological recess. The new version of the pledge is on the screen, complete with the redlining, as they call it, so that you can see the additions and changes. And what I propose to do for the benefit of the delegation is to go through calling out the changes. I believe, without putting words in the mouth of our delegation, having reviewed his delegation, which he was kind enough to send in advance, I don't think he's going to object to these things, but we'll see. Mr. Sauvageau, your patience is appreciated. So the first change is to change the first sentence by adding some words to make it clear or clearer that what we do is approve applications, we don't build houses. The town of Oakville is committed to playing its part in the delivery of housing for Ontario, just ignore the article "the" there that shouldn't be there. And the clerk's bylaw to fix typos will be invoked to clean that up. Let's not sweat the small stuff here. For Ontario's growing population, by approving its application approval processes to meet housing demand. And then we add at the end of the block, Oakville recognizes its role as approval of applications, not building housing units. Then we go down to the first point of the 50. And we start by saying, we add at the start, in the Livable Oakville official plan, the town has worked with Halton Region and the province to establish and defend a robust urban structure, etc. And that block ends with the sentence, our identified system of centers and corridors provides the opportunity to accommodate this needed housing, and we add, with the livability we foster in our Livable Oakville official plan. Okay? Then in the second block, we add at the end to the last sentence, the housing, so this block says we have to do a new housing strategy. And the housing strategy then feeds into our official plan review in case anybody's unclear about that. Right over there? Okay. So we add to the end, the housing strategy will be reflected in updated land use policy. That's what it means, that it feeds the official plan. Zoning bylaws and future programs to specify what numbers of each kind of housing formats and sizes are needed in Oakville. So that, I don't, once you said that, I don't think you need to start getting down to how many of this particular kind and that particular kind. We're saying them all. And we also, several times, oh, please don't scroll down yet. In the, just go back up, please. I just want to call everyone's attention to the second line of the first opening paragraph, because we took pains there to say that we recognize the immediate need for new housing, including And now we say basically every kind there is. Market-based, attainable, affordable, social, and assisted for all tenancies, including rental, among the many types of housing required by the public. So that was meant to be, in short form, every darn kind of housing, and every kind and size. Madam Clerk, the next page now, I think. And keep going. This page survived. Next page, please. This page had no surgery. Next page, please. Now in 31, under town monitoring measures and reporting, we add a clause at the end. So the last sentence says, of this block 31 says, the town will track and publish the delivery of affordable, supportive, and rental housing to ensure ministry and the public have timely awareness of the availability of the full range of housing choice required to achieve the complete communities envisioned in the provincial policy statement, including adequate local parkland. And then the next header used to say what Oakville depends upon from the province to support this pledge, and we had a discussion about whether that was as strong as what Oakville's pledge is contingent on from the province. And in the drafting part of this technological break, I think I hope we've agreed that what Oakville requires from the province to support this pledge is plainer English and satisfies everybody's concern on that. Then in 32, Councillor Chisholm.
Your Worship, I have a little bit of a concern about the statement including adequate local parkland. I don't like the word adequate. Can we step that up a bit?
Too much parkland? I mean, give us a word.
Just take out adequate, yeah, yeah. And I'm not striving for mediocrity here.
All right, I don't have the ability to edit, but I'm agreeable to that, and we'll just take it out before we send it.
Sufficient.
Is that all right?
How about sufficient?
Okay.
Thank you.
I think they mean the same thing, but. All right. All right.
Sufficient it is. Councillor Adams has a help, please.
Councillor Adams.
Can I offer the word robust?
I tell you what, I get it. I get what you want to say. How about you let me make the final choice, but it'll be along, the words will be along these lines, including maintaining our local parkland standard, which is 2.2 hectares per thousand.
I like that. Good. That's great.
All right. Okay. Now, it's important to understand that we do not have a 2.2 hectares per thousand residents for local parkland. It's a physical impossibility in our town because of the way it grew. So I'll have to work on it, but by the deadline, I'll come up with something that reflects our concern about having healthy parkland.
But will it say local parkland?
Well, if we say 2.2, no, it can't, because that's not our standard.
So I really would like to say that.
I could say including, let's just go back to what Councillor Chisholm said, including local parkland. Councillor Chisholm? Sufficient. Okay, it'll be sufficient. All right. So can we go to 32 now? Because we're good with the header change to requires. All right, in 32, we've changed it to say that the province must work with municipalities to create a new long-term permanent municipal funding strategy instead of asking them to open discussions to consider a new long-term strategy. All right, and we've added for completion and insurance at the end to talk about, when we're talking about being made whole, that we want to be made whole for the losses under Bill 24 as well as Bill 23. Okay? Madam Clerk, next page. And can we just see the top of this and the bottom of the previous? There. So in 33, that the province recognizes the risk to municipalities of servicing land for development without any guarantee of the timing or extent of that development and the associated collection of development charges, and works with municipalities to provide upfront funding for infrastructure to mitigate this risk, and we are adding, and protect the local property taxpayer. Okay, Madam Clerk, can you go down to the next change? We got pretty far with no more change, and that's the end. Now, shall we, I would like to suggest that the next thing in order would be to hear from the delegation. Mr. Sauvageau, welcome. Thank you for your patience. Just before we ask you to speak, I'm going to ask council if two of them would move and second that we go past the hour. Let's see. Councillor McNeice, thank you, and Councillor Elgar, thank you. Any objection? I'd just like to point out that one of our colleagues here can't be here tomorrow. And so in the spirit of all for one and one for all, perhaps we go past the hour. Anyway, it's carried. Thank you very much.
Yes, good evening, everyone. I understand Oakville will be advancing the necessary policies and process improvements to accommodate the provincially mandated housing target of 33,000 units by 2031 and 2032. As well, per discussions at the Region of Halton meeting of March 8th, the town has approximately 25,400 units in the pipeline to fulfill its pledge of 33,000 units. Next, please. Thank you. However, the town needs to pledge its commitment for affordable and attainable housing, not just a housing pledge. And I see the mayor and council has attempted to do that, right, with the changes made. Consequently, I just want to highlight the following topics, which you can see above. Next, please. Thank you, Joe. I concur with the town that it's in a crisis of housing affordability among all classes. As you can see on the left side of the slide, under the middle column, small households, one to two persons, income threshold, maximum purchase price, maximum monthly ownership cost, and maximum monthly rent. It shows how expensive the town is. And that's, as of 2021, the state of housing report from the region. And beside it, the mayor mentioned, as well as I believe Councillor Grant, in regards to the town is the fourth highest in Canada for rents. So I just need to state that the town needs affordable and attainable housing. Next slide. And this slide was presented by the director in regards to government-assisted and non-subsidized. I just want to point out that based on the past definition, it's 30% or less of low-income, mid-income household. That has changed with the recent changes. Affordability, just want to point out, is not subsidize or government-assisted housing. It confuses sometimes a lot of people. I just want to give you an example of the City of Toronto, where the Toronto Senior Strategy identifies the need to create housing to facilitate aging in place across the city as part of the Housing TO Action Plan. So I believe the town has an opportunity to create more more housing units. Next slide, please. Thank you. I won't touch on all the various items here. I just want to highlight the top three to implement affordable and attainable housing strategy and roadmap, which is coming about, selling surplus land to affordable housing developers, as well as updating the official planning and zoning bylaws, such as removing the minimum housing size. Next slide. I applaud the town's commitment to implement the housing strategy. I understand the town is working towards a housing strategy, as well as updating the official plan, as well as the policies, zoning bylaws, and as well as having a comprehensive review of the town's residential areas. However, to date, I haven't seen any established time frame as to when the strategy or the action plan will be implemented. I believe it'll be coming up soon, within this year. Now, the access to safe, good quality, affordable housing is an important determinant to physical and mental health and should be fundamental goal of a comprehensive, affordable, and attainable housing strategy and action plan. The town should be accountable to its residents by maintaining visibility to ensure important issues such as affordable housing is not forgotten. I thank the council and the mayor as well for this strategy and action plan, which will be coming in the near future, as well as what Dr. Moffat mentioned, as well as yourself, that the town will be having regular monitoring and reporting on progress. We can learn from the work done by the region of Halton to implement our own strategy and roadmap. As well, other municipalities, such as the City of Mississauga, have already established housing strategies. Rather than reinventing the wheel, the town should learn from these strategies and build upon them. Best practices, bottom line, should look at the various municipalities that already have a strategy and action plan in place. Next slide, please. In respect to the second item, selling surplus town land to affordable housing developers, the town, through the Oakville Municipal Development Corporation, has an opportunity to increase the town's rental or affordable housing on the former public works site. As you aware, the mandate of the OMDC is to utilize surplus or underutilized town lands for the purpose of advancing community objectives. This can take the form of adding to the town's rental and affordable housing opportunities, as well as to manage investments, ensuring long-term economic benefit of town land. As well, I commend the mayor for his letter to the Ministry of Affairs and Housing for his pledge of 100 units of affordable housing. May I suggest that this number of units be increased to at least 250 units. 100 units within the time frame established is really nothing. The opportunity exists to establish at least 250, I believe. I just want to bring that forward. Next slide. Secondly, I understand, or lastly, I should say, I understand the town is updating the official plans and zoning bylaws. This should be done as soon as possible, and I trust that the town will do so. However, to date, I haven't seen any time frame. These bylaws should eliminate the restrictive, exclusionary zoning found in many municipalities, including the town. The exclusion zoning has been identified as a barrier to the implementation of the missing middle housing option for neighborhoods in Ontario. The town will miss out on an opportunity to show it as a caring community, especially policymakers do not include measures to inject affordability into the housing equation. Next slide, please. In regards to residential infill opportunities, an example for many, for example, can be within existing neighborhoods, the ability to have accessory dwelling units, as well as family size 4 to 6 plexes with affordable requirements. Next slide, please, Joe. Thank you. So why do we see mainly large single-family homes in Oakville? According to the Fraser Institute surveyed of developers and home builders in 2016, increase in affordability housing options via medium-sized housing is largely prevented by policy and development fees. I know others may differ, but it's in a report in 2016, it shows that the compliant costs and fees per residential unit in Greater Golden Horseshoe range from $21,000 in Hamilton to $60,500 in Oakville, while the City of Toronto, it was $46,570 per unit. Overall, the increased costs associated with new residential development in Oakville makes construction of the middle housing type economically unattractive for developers who resort to constructing many units in a high-rise apartment condo in high-density zone areas or constructing large homes in areas zoned for single detached homes, where the increased number of units of square footage can facilitate a better return on investment. We've heard this. Next slide, please. For example, I give you an example of the City of Toronto, exploring many opportunities.
Mr. Sauvageau?
Yes, please.
You've wandered very far away from the topic of the evening, and your time is expiring quickly. Can you wrap up?
Oh, yes, I am. I'm almost at the very end. I don't think I've wandered, to be honest with you. I think it's an important issue in regards to both a pledge of affordable and attainable housing within Oakville. And I think you concur with that as well. Lastly, the future of town's livability is in your hands. Hard choices will be made by you to ensure the town is a leading, thriving, and caring community that is welcoming and livable for all. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sauvageau, for your time and your effort in bringing that message to us. Are there questions for the delegation? Thank you, Mr. Sauvageau.
You're welcome, and thank you for your time.
All right, Council, I'm going to assume that I can ask you to turn to the necessary motions for this meeting. I would ask first for a mover and seconder that the presentation from Dr. Mike Moffat regarding the housing situation in Ontario be received. Councillor Longo and Councillor Haslett-Thiel, any objection? There being none, that's carried. Thank you, everybody. 3.2, we need a mover and seconder that the report from the Office of the Chief Administrative Officer be received, that the Minister of Municipal Affairs be advised that the town of Oakville can accommodate the required housing units within the town's existing urban structure, is advancing its online presence and providing for enhanced and efficient development processes. We'll continue to work in cooperation with the province of Ontario and Halton Region to deliver infrastructure, i.e. water and wastewater services, and community services such as schools and hospitals, and will rely upon the Premier of Ontario's stated objective to support municipalities who experience a financial shortfall as a result of implementing Bill 23. 3, that Oakville's housing pledge report be forwarded to Halton Region's clerk, requesting Halton Region's continued support to deliver the necessary infrastructure which will allow Oakville to advance the required housing units. 4, that the mayor be authorized to submit the revised Oakville's housing pledge to the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing prior to March 22nd. And 5, that this report be forwarded to the Ministry of Municipal Affairs, representing Oakville's response to the province of Ontario's municipal housing target. I need a mover and seconder. Councillor Shi and Councillor Giddings, thank you. Any objection? Councillor Haslett-Thiel?
I just have one question on the actual pledge itself. I wondered if wording around sustainable design and climate action can be incorporated. And because it's come up both in Dr. Moffat's and others.
It's now out of order under our rules. But I think the mention in the letter, the pledge letter of environmental and climate concerns will capture it.
All right, thank you very much.
So it appears to me that the vote is unanimous in support. I saw no one objecting. I would like to ask the clerk to record our names in accordance with our recorded vote procedure without making everybody, considering the hour, we won't delay the meeting. And besides, some of us have been recently injured. I'm not sure how much you want to stand up and sit down all night. So thank you, everybody, for that. We still have one more motion, and that is an item, rather. 3.3, the master plan approach under the provincial More Homes Built Faster plan. The Commissioner of Community Infrastructure is available for questions. You had the report. It's an information report, and the motion is to receive it. If you have questions for Commissioner Fu, they're in order now, and if not, a mover and seconder to receive the report you were given is in order. Councillor Chisholm moves the receipt. Councillor O'Meara?
Yeah, I just have a quick question, Your Worship. Sorry about that.
Can I have a second and a question?
Sure, absolutely.
Thank
you. Thank you very much. Sorry, Commissioner. Just with regards to the steps that we're going to undertake, that's written in the report here. Sorry about that. I've got to bring it up here. I'm curious as to, I think Councillor Adams had mentioned earlier about the impacts potentially of Bill 23 and you know what we're classifying as infrastructure and whether we might be made whole or not. Will we be looking at reduced service levels or the options of what reduced service levels look like if we cannot be made whole through DCs through this program? I mean, will we be looking at that holistically?
Through Mr. Mayor, yes. Under stage 4, we will look at develop mitigation strategy regarding service level expectations and prioritize the timing and the scale of implementation of the overall master plan recommendations.
Okay, so when you say mitigation, I guess I'm undertaking that word to maybe be a different thing from what I'm thinking of. I mean, I had mentioned just kind of in jest, but maybe it's not, you know, if we don't have enough money, do we not get as many street lights as a new development? Is there not asphalt? Is it chip and tar? Is it like what, are we going to look at what the impacts are of getting less per unit and what the new service level might have to be?
Through Mr. Chair, the different master plans will have different service levels. So, for example, for fire master plan, there's a legislative requirement that you cannot compromise. But say, for example, for the road master plans, and we may prioritize on the timing of the implementation of those physical infrastructures. And for say, such as recreational master plan, they might be looking at mitigation of service levels of programming and the type of services that we provide. So it's actually going to be a comprehensive review of mitigating strategies based on the funding levels.
Okay, yeah, thanks. I think it's a good juxtaposition when we go and talk to our residents about the impacts of this and what that might actually mean to them in their communities. It's important to have those discussions. So thank you for that. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you, Councillor O'Meara. I do believe this matter will come up again. I'll put the vote. Is there any objection to the motion to receive? Madam Clerk, there's none, and I declare that motion carried also. Council, we now need a mover and seconder for consideration and reading of the confirmatory bylaw. Councillor Hazzathiel, Councillor Nanda, thank you both. Any objection? There being none, I declare that carried as well. That completes the work of this special council meeting. I want to thank everybody for the heartfelt and carefully thought out concerns they all brought to the matter. Certainly, I don't think the province can be in any doubt about the fear, uncertainty, and doubt that has been expressed here tonight over how well they're doing this and what the impacts will be. And as often is the case in the great movie of life, we're going to have to wait and see. So with that, our meeting has come to an end. It's terrific working with you all, and I especially like it when we can actually all put a little bit of water in our wine and come to an agreement like this. Thank you very much.